Hey everyone. So I figured I would share how I do my sourdough bread because I now love making sourdough bread and it's kind of become just part of our weekly routine. So I make at least 2 loaves a week, and then I also make bagels and then a whole bunch of other things with the sourdough starter. So we are big fans of sourdough bread and that whole process, and I'm really enjoying baking and all of that. So I figured I would share with you what I do. So I originally got started because of an account I follow. They shared Farmhouse on Boone. They shared an easy make your own starter and then sourdough bread recipe. So I followed that process to make the starter, and then followed that process to make the bread. And then now that I've been making loaves of sourdough for I want to say 7 months now, I've kind of tweaked and done my own spin on things, but I will still, give all the credit to Farmhouse on Boone because that's kind of what got me started. And I will link her starter recipe, a link to her blog, and then I will also link her her sourdough recipe. Like I said, that was the basis of what I'm doing now, just I tweaked it a little bit, and here's kind of my spin on it. So I hope you guys enjoy watching, and I hope you guys find this helpful, and I hope you guys start baking because it is very delicious. And surprisingly, if anyone knows my husband, you know that he is very frugal and very, is it worth it? Are we spending way more, you doing it yourself? And so we buy everything organic, and I'll share that in the video of, everything that I use. But we buy all the flours organic and everything. And even with it all being organic, we calculated out. I mean, obviously I don't know what the cost is of, the gas stove, and I didn't, count the utensils. So our Dutch oven, obviously that's a one-time purchase, but then you'll have it for years to come as long as you don't break it. So just the material to make the bread, we calculated coming down to about under $2 per loaf. So that's very inexpensive, especially considering that it is 100% organic and we know exactly what's in it. So it's definitely very budget friendly. If you guys enjoy this video, if you have any questions, please let me know, and yeah, get baking. So I have my little baking buddy, Mrs. No Nap today. So I'm gonna have her watch, but I'm very low on bread, so I need to make it today, so I can't wait until tomorrow. So I keep my starter in this glass container, and I have this in the fridge. And then so this is what I do. So I take it out and I feed it, and then if it's been a while, if it's been a couple of days where I hadn't fed it, then I'll feed it and I'll kind of let it go, and then I'll feed it again so it's freshly fed within like an hour to maybe tops 2 hours before I make the dough. So I fed this at around 10 a.m. and right now it is 3:11. So I'm gonna have to feed it again before I make the dough, but I just wanted to show you kind of what it looks like. So this is already hungry for me. Like whenever it's been longer, for me, I don't like when the sourdough is very sour. Like when the bread has that really soury taste. I know some people really like it. I like it more no sourdoughy taste, or more mild. Then, like I said, the tip would be to freshly feed it before you bake with it. So that is what I'm gonna do now. Okay, so here I am prepping the starter. So you want to mix it up real well, and then here I'm just pointing out the markings. So that's just so it's easier for me to figure out how much I want to feed it. So each of those markings represents 1 cup. So if you have 1 cup of flour, you want to feed it half a cup flour and half a cup water, and then stir it real well so it's all mixed nicely. Definitely always want to make sure that you mix your starter real well, especially if it's been a while since you fed it, because liquid will separate out. And then when you feed it, definitely make sure you mix it nicely so it's all blended well so you don't have clumps of flour in there. And then you just put it aside until you're ready to bake. And so like I said, I like to have my starter really freshly fed. So I like to use my starter about an hour to 2 hours max after I fed it. And then you want to start weighing out your ingredients. So you will need 375 grams of all-purpose flour. We use the organic Target brand just because it's the least expensive that we have found. And then for the whole wheat flour, you want to use 100 grams. We like to use the Bob's Red Mill. Next, you're going to weigh out your water, so you want 325 grams of water, and then the salt, you want 7 grams. Now with the salt, that's the one you do not want to go over or under. With the other ones, if you're 1 to 2 grams over or under, it's not the end of the world, but with the salt, you definitely want to make sure you are exact. And then you measure out 100 grams of the starter. So next you're ready to start mixing things. So first you want to take your water and heat it up. So I heat the water up in my microwave for 55 seconds, and that gives it, you know, a not hot but not just lukewarm temperature. And then you mix that into your flour mixture, so the whole wheat and the all-purpose, and then you incorporate it. So I use a little spatula to just kind of keep folding it in until it's all nicely blended. Now this is a step that takes a little bit long, and you really gotta work it in there, but it will all eventually, you know, come together very nicely. And then once you have it nicely mixed together, then you're gonna want to put a damp kitchen towel over top and just let it sit out on your counter for 30 minutes. Okay, so after the 30 minutes are up, you will uncover it, and then you will put on the starter salt mixer. So if you recall, when I measured out the salt, I measured out the salt and I had to just pour the starter on top of that. So first I just mix the salt and the starter just so it's nice and blended, and then I throw it into the dough mixture. And I, again, use my little spatula. You can use your hands, but it's just a little messy, and I did that at first with my hands, and I would always forget to take my ring off, and then it was just a disaster. So I just use the spatula. It takes a little bit longer, but it gets the job done. And then you will cover it until you are ready for your stretch and folds. Okay, so during trial and error, I found out that I don't have to follow a strict schedule of doing my stretch and folds, and I don't have to do it, you know, any crazy way. I just do it kind of what I have time for and what works my schedule. So basically, I found that if I come back to my dough anywhere between 15 minutes to an hour, that it's perfectly fine. So just whenever you think about it, come back. As long as it's between the 15 and 1 hour mark, we'll uncover it, wet your hands, and with moist hands, so wet hands, you will kind of stretch the dough. So I kind of stretched it long, and then I rolled it on itself, and then I stretch it long, and then rolled it in on itself, and I did that a couple of times. Again, there's no rhyme or reason. I don't really have a strict method. I just kind of do that a couple of times until I feel like, okay, I'm done, and then I'll plop it back in there, and then cover it with a damp towel, and then let it sit until the next stretch and fold. So the next stretch and fold is same thing. I don't have a strict time or rhyme or reason to how many stretches and folds I do. So I just kind of, again, between the, you know, now I'll say between the 30 to the 2 hour mark of whenever I think about it, I come back and I do my stretch and folds. And again, I kind of just fold it around and then kind of roll it into a little ball. By tucking it under, and then plop it in there, cover with a wet towel. And then, you know, this particular day I only did 2 stretch and folds, and I found that whether I do 2 or 3 or 4, the bread turns out the same. So, you know, I've just been doing the bare minimum just because I don't have time to, you know, keep thinking about the dough and going back into the kitchen to do the stretch and folds. So I'll cover it with a wet towel, and then I just make sure that before I go to bed that I freshly dampen the towel, because there have been a couple of times when I forgot to do that, and because it's such a long stretch throughout the night, that whenever I wake up in the morning that the towel is completely dry, and then the dough kind of forms like a hardened layer, and you definitely do not want that. You don't want it to start to dry out, so just make sure the towel stays nice and wet. and you'll just again leave it out on the counter. And sometimes what I do is I'll cover it, like I'll put a plastic lid over top. I don't snap it in place, but I'll put it on top. I don't know if it helps or does anything. The main thing is just make sure you really dampen the towel before you go to bed. And then in the morning when you uncover it, you'll see it's nice and bubbly and it rose. And again, with wet hands, you'll kind of loosen it from the side and then kind of underneath, and then you'll kind of like plop it, and I don't really know what the method is, but just kind of roll it or like fold it in on itself and kind of tuck it under and kind of form like a little ball. Cover it with flour, the top and the bottom, and then a little bit the bowl just so it doesn't stick. And then this time you cover it with a lid and you put it in the refrigerator, for a minimum of 8 hours, and then you are ready to bake. Okay. So you might be able to hear Adeline. She just woke up, but I'm about to get the dough out of the fridge, score it, and then put it in the Dutch oven. So this is my Dutch oven. I have a Lodge. I think this is a 4-quart. And then I have parchment paper. And then definitely get gloves that are rubbery, because if you just have the ones that are just like the fabric, this will get so hot that you will burn a hole in it. So get the rubber, because we actually just got this one, because the other one that was just this material, we burned a hole in the thumb. So make sure it's like the silicone up at the top. Highly, highly, highly recommend. But yes, that's all you need is gloves. I recommend having 2. And then obviously you need the parchment paper and then a Dutch oven. And then I'm going to show you guys the cold method just because that is how I do it all the time, but I'll also walk you through like the traditional hot method, I guess. So the cold method, you want to put in a baking sheet, and then you're going to put the cold bread dough, once you take it out of the fridge, you're going to score it, and then you're going to plop it into your Dutch oven. So you're going to put it on here and put it with the paper into the Dutch oven, put on the lid, put it into the cold oven with the baking sheet underneath, so it will go on this shelf. And then you're going to turn on the oven at 500 degrees, and you're going to set your timer for 40 minutes. Now, time may vary a little bit depending on your oven, so this is a gas oven, but about 40 minutes. So for 40 minutes at 500. Then when that timer goes off, you're going to remove the lid of the Dutch oven, and then you are going to lower the temperature down to 475. And then you're going to bake it an additional 20 to 25 minutes. So at the 20 mark, I would look at it and see like how brown it's getting. If it's starting to like turn a little too brown, then call it done. And then when you take it out, you're just gonna kind of knock on the bottom of the bread with like your knuckle or like a fork, and if it sounds hollow, then it's baked all the way through. If it's not hollow, then obviously put it back in. You have to, if you do the cold method, use this. If you don't, because you're cooking it for longer at the 500, as like the temperature's climbing, your bottom will get very, 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 very crispy and crunchy and like hard to chew. So you don't want that. That's why you want to put a sheet underneath, because it'll help. So that's the cold method, and that's the way that I've been doing it, just because I feel like it's more energy efficient. But at the beginning I did use the hot method, but I found out that I didn't need to do that. So if I am baking 2 loaves, obviously the second bread is going to go into a hot oven. So the hot method is you will preheat the oven and the Dutch oven to 500 degrees, and then you're going to need this to get really hot. So you need to have it heated up for 40 minutes to an hour so that this is nice and hot. Then you're going to do the same thing, score the bread, have it on here, transfer it into here, lid on, into the oven at 500. You're going to have it in the oven for 25 minutes. And then again, depending on your oven, but that's how it is for me, 25 minutes. Then you're going to remove the lid, and then you're going to cook it again for an additional 20 to 25 minutes. And then again, take it out and knock it on the back to make sure, the bottoms, to make sure that it's done. But that's the hot method. But again, you run the oven for longer, and then you have to deal with putting the bread in a very hot Dutch oven. I don't really like that. This way I can put it in here, maneuver, because this gets heavy, maneuver it, and then the only thing I have to do is obviously remove this, and then whenever it's hot, and then take it out when it's done. But the cold method to me is a little bit easier. But yeah, so now you guys can watch me score the bread, and then I will be putting it in the oven. And then I'm obviously not going to film me taking the lid off, because I don't know how I would even do that without burning myself. But, and then I'll just show you what it looks like whenever it's done. So like I mentioned, you take your dough out of the refrigerator, and then I had Adeline in my arms, so I had to use one hand, but you kind of like loosen it so you can plop it out, and then you score it. I obviously did something very simple just because, again, I did it one-handed, and then you put it in the Dutch oven, and then into the oven she goes. So I just took the lid off. I'm going to give you a quick little peek, but I don't want a lot of the heat to escape. But this is what it looks like. So before slicing into it, you want to make sure it is completely cooled, otherwise it will be gummy. So wait for it to completely cool, and then you can cut it and enjoy, and happy baking.